A house this size is not a home. It is an echo chamber for loneliness. The master suite of the Blackwood estate is a cavern of velvet and mahogany, designed to make a man feel like a king. But for the last 6 months, it has only made me feel like a prisoner. I sat in my wheelchair, the leather cold against my back, staring at the relentless gray rain lashing against the window pane. The rhythm of the drops sounded like fingers tapping on a coffin lid. I am Arthur Blackwood. I am 79 years old. I built a telecommunications empire that laid the fiber optic nerves of this country. I connected millions of people. I made the world smaller. Yet here I sat, isolated in a room worth more than most people earn in a lifetime, unable to connect with the only 2 people left in my world. My daughter, Elena, and her husband, Marcus. They moved in 6 months ago, right after Dr. Evans diagnosed me with a mild heart arrhythmia. A manageable condition, he said, nothing to worry about. But Elena had insisted. "We want to be with you, Daddy," she had said, her eyes shimmering with tears that I now realize were as artificial as the sweetener she uses. Cherish, that was the word she used. The door to my suite opened. I didn't turn around. I knew the cadence of those footsteps. Soft, predatory, efficient. "Tea time, Daddy," Elena cooed. She walked into my line of sight. She was beautiful in a sharp, angular way, wearing a silk blouse that cost a fortune and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She carried a silver tray with a single porcelain cup. The steam rising from it carried a scent that had become the defining aroma of my decline. Herbal, she called it, a special blend for my heart. To me, it smelled faintly, sickly sweet, like bitter almonds. "I'm not thirsty, Elena," I rasped. My voice sounded weak, a dry rustle of leaves. It wasn't an act, not entirely. For weeks I had been fading. My hands shook so badly I could barely sign a check. My vision was a smear of watercolors. My mind felt wrapped in cotton wool, thoughts slipping away before I could grasp them. "Now, Arthur," she scolded gently, placing the tray on the side table. "You know what Dr. Evans said. Hydration is key, and this helps with the palpitations. Drink up." She held the cup to my lips. I looked at her. I looked for the little girl who used to sit on my knee and ask me how the telephone worked. I looked for the teenager who cried when her goldfish died. I couldn't find them.
I saw only a flat, impatient expectation. I took a sip. It was warm, cloying, and left a metallic tang on the back of my tongue. "That's a good boy," she said, wiping my mouth with a napkin as if I were a toddler. "Marcus and I are going to be in the library reviewing the estate planning documents." "Rest," I mumbled. She left, closing the heavy oak door with a click that sounded like a lock engaging. I waited. I counted to 60 in my head, fighting the urge to swallow the rest of the poison. 30 minutes. That was the pattern. The fog always descended 30 minutes after the tea. But today was different. Today I had spilled half of it into the napkin she used, and yesterday I had managed to pour the entire cup into the potted ficus tree in the corner when she turned to adjust the curtains. I looked at the ficus. Its leaves were yellowing, curling inward, dying a slow chemical death. That tree was me. I wheeled myself backward, away from the window. The room was dim, the afternoon light fading into a bruised purple twilight. I let my head loll back against the headrest. I let my mouth hang open slightly. I slowed my breathing. I became the vegetable they wanted me to be. 10 minutes later, the door creaked open again. It wasn't Elena. It was Marcus. He didn't come in. He stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the hall light. "He's out," Marcus whispered. "Look at him." "Good," Elena's voice hissed from the hallway. "God, this is taking forever." Evan said his heart was weak. "The constitution of an ox," Marcus muttered. "He has to go soon, Marcus," Elena said, her voice dropping lower, but in the silence of the big house, it carried to my ears with terrifying clarity. "The bridge loan is due on the 15th. That's 5 days away. If the estate hasn't cleared probate by then, the bank seizes the penthouse. We lose the deposit on the yacht." I know, Marcus snapped. Don't you think I know that? Be patient, Elena said. Her voice was cold, clinical, devoid of even a shred of the warmth she performed for the doctors. I upped the dosage of the digitalis in the tea today. I doubled it. It mimics natural heart failure perfectly. Dr. Evans won't even order an autopsy given his history. Just a few more days, Marcus. My heart stopped. It wasn't the digitalis. It was the shock, the absolute, crushing weight of the betrayal. They weren't just waiting for me to die. They were executing me. They were murdering me for a penthouse and a boat.
My own daughter, the flesh of my flesh, was poisoning me slowly, day by day, watching me wither with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a lab rat. I sat there, frozen, listening to their footsteps fade down the hall. The grief was a physical blow, a punch to the gut that left me gasping for air. I wanted to weep. I wanted to scream. I wanted to die just to stop the pain of knowing. But as the seconds ticked by, the grief began to harden. It cooled. It crystallized into something sharp and jagged. I built a dynasty. I survived corporate wars in the 80s where men destroyed each other for sport. I survived a hostile takeover in the 90s that would have broken a lesser man. I survived the death of my wife, the only person who ever truly loved me. I would not be taken out by a cup of tea and a greedy daughter. If you are listening to this, if you have ever sat in a room you paid for and wondered if the people around you love you or just the lifestyle you provide, listen closely. I wish someone had warned me that the people you built a castle for are often the ones trying to lock you in the dungeon. But warnings are useless when the poison is already in your veins. Action is the only antidote. I wheeled myself to the bathroom. I forced myself to vomit, purging the small amount of tea I had swallowed. I rinsed my mouth. I splashed cold water on my face. I looked in the mirror. The man staring back was gray, gaunt, his eyes sunken. But deep in those pupils, a spark had returned. The fog was lifting. I needed a plan. I couldn't go to the police. Not yet. I was weak. Elena had spent months telling everyone, the doctors, the neighbors, the servants, that I was becoming paranoid, senile, confused. If I claimed she was poisoning me, she would just look at them with sad eyes and say, "See." They would sedate me, and then she would finish the job. No, I needed undeniable proof. I needed to catch them in a lie so profound, so public, that the world could not look away. I went to my closet. Hidden in the false bime of my old travel trunk was a burner phone I kept for emergencies. I dialed a number I hadn't called in years. "Dr. Eris," I whispered when the line connected. "Jonathan." The voice was gravelly, surprised. "No, Jonathan," I said. "I need a consult, not as a patient, as a friend, and I need you to bring your bag." Dr. Jonathan Eris was a retired coroner, a brilliant physician, and a man who owed me his life 3 times over from our days in the jungle.
He arrived 2 hours later, ostensibly to give me a second opinion on my arrhythmia, a visit I had arranged via text while Elena was in a shower. We sat in the library. It was the only room in the house I had swept for bugs 5 years ago during a corporate espionage scare. It was safe. I told him everything: the tea, the conversation, the deadline. Jonathan listened, his face darkening with every word. He checked my pulse. He looked at my pupils. "It's digitalis," he confirmed grimly. "Foxglove. Classic. Hard to trace in a man with a known heart condition unless you're specifically looking for toxicity levels. She's killing you, Arthur." "Not yet," I said. "I want them destroyed, Jonathan. I don't want them to just go to jail. I want them to lose everything they think they're gaining. A theater of death," I said. "I'm going to give them exactly what they want." Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "We fake it," I said. "You're the coroner on call for the county this week, aren't you? You sign the certificate. You handle the transport. Arthur, the sedatives required to mimic a death state convincing enough for a paramedic check, it's dangerous." "She's poisoning me anyway," I snapped. "I'd rather risk death on my own terms than wait for her to pour the final cup." Jonathan looked at me for a long time. Then he nodded. "There's a compound, tetrodotoxin derivative. It slows the metabolic rate to near zero. Shallow breathing, imperceptible pulse. It lasts for 12 hours. Done, I said. But that's not the end of it. The mahogany one I ordered 5 years ago. I need to modify it, I said, a grim smile touching his lips. The next 24 hours were a blur of adrenaline and stealth. While Elena and Marcus slept, confident in their victory, I was in the garage. I retrieved my old tech kit, soldering irons, wiring, high-fidelity audio components from my days engineering global networks. I gave the equipment to Jonathan. He smuggled it into the funeral home. He followed my instructions. He hollowed out the silk lining of the casket. He embedded a long-range Bluetooth speaker into the pillow where my head would rest. He installed a pinhole camera in the floral spray attachment. He linked it all to a secure cloud server accessible via my tablet. It was insane. It was theatrical. It was perfect. The night of the event arrived. Tuesday, 3 days before their loan was due. Elena brought the tea at 4 p.m. She looked particularly cheerful.
She was humming. "Here we go, Daddy," she said, setting the cup down. I looked at the cup. This was it, the lethal dose. I had already taken the antidote Jonathan had provided, a chemical buffer to neutralize the digitalis, and I had the second pill, the one that would stop my heart just enough to fool them, taped under my tongue. "Thank you, Elena," I said. "You've been—" "I love you, Dad," she said automatically. I know, I lied. I drank the tea. I swallowed the pill under my tongue. I waited 5 minutes. Then I let the cup slip from my hand. It shattered on the floor. I gasped. I clutched my chest. I let my body convulse, throwing myself forward in the chair. I choked out, "My chest." She turned. She saw me. She didn't run to me. She didn't scream for help. She stood there. She watched. She checked her watch. "It's happening," she whispered to herself. She waited. 1 minute. 2 minutes. 3 minutes. I lay on the floor, my vision tunneling, the drug taking hold, pulling me down into the gray void. I watched her through slitted eyes. She was smiling, a small, satisfied smile of a woman who just won the lottery. Finally, after 5 minutes of silence, she took a deep breath. She messed up her hair. She forced tears into her eyes. And then she screamed, "Marcus, help!" I let the darkness take me. The next 12 hours were a cold, dark dream. I was aware of movement. I was aware of voices, paramedics, heavy footsteps, the zip of a body bag. I felt the vibration of the ambulance. Then, silence, cold air. "Clear," Jonathan's voice said. I felt a sharp prick in my arm, the adrenaline shot. I gasped. Air rushed into my lungs like fire. I sat up, shivering, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I was in the prep room of Heir's funeral home. Stainless steel tables, the smell of formaldehyde. Jonathan was there, holding a blanket. I wheezed. "Perfectly," he said. Elena put on quite a show, crying, wailing. "Good," I said, swinging my legs off the table. We spent the night in the back room. I recorded the audio files. I synced the Bluetooth. I tested the camera feed. I wasn't the corpse anymore. I was the director. The next morning, I sat in the private office of the funeral home, wrapped in a blanket, holding a tablet. On the screen was a live feed from the viewing room. Elena and Marcus walked in. They were there to pick out their mourning clothes and finalize the arrangements. They thought they were alone.
"We did it," Marcus said, grinning. He high-fived her. "I told you," Elena laughed. The old man was weak. "Probate starts Monday. We'll have the advance by Wednesday." They kissed, right in front of the empty display coffin. I watched them on the screen. My hand hovered over the microphone button on the tablet. "Not yet," I whispered to the empty room. I leaned back in the chair. Tomorrow was the funeral. Half the city would be there. Business rivals, fake friends, the press. They were all coming to see Arthur Blackwood buried. Instead, they were going to see him rise. A funeral is a theater of the absurd, where the ticket price is a human life, and the actors are usually the ones who held the knife. I sat in the shadows of the choir loft, 60 feet above the marble floor of St. Jude's Cathedral, hidden behind a heavy velvet curtain that smelled of dust and incense. Below me, the nave was filling up. It was a sea of black wool, silk, and false piety. I watched them file in. Business rivals I had crushed in the 90s, board members who had been plotting my ouster for a decade, and friends I hadn't spoken to since the Bush administration.
They were all there to pay their respects, or more accurately, to make sure the old lion was truly dead before they started fighting over the carcass. I adjusted the brightness on the tablet resting on my knees. The screen showed a crisp, high-definition feed from the pinhole camera I had installed in the floral spray atop the mahogany casket. The view was grotesque and beautiful. I could see the faces of the people in the front row with terrifying clarity. The casket itself sat in the center of the aisle, a dark, gleaming monolith. It was closed, of course. Inside, there was no body. There were 300 pounds of lead weights wrapped in movers blankets to simulate the heft of a corpse, and a nest of high-fidelity audio equipment powered by a lithium battery I had soldered myself. It was the most expensive speaker cabinet in the world. I looked at the front row. Elena was there. She looked immaculate. She was wearing a black dress that I knew cost more than my first house, her hair pulled back in a severe, elegant bun. She was dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, but through the camera feed, I could see her eyes were dry. She was performing.
She was playing the role of the devastated heiress, the orphan left behind in the cold world, with nothing but a $50 million trust fund to keep her warm. Marcus sat beside her. He looked solemn, his head bowed. But his hand was busy. He was checking his smartwatch every 30 seconds. I knew what he was looking at. He was checking the stock price of Blackwood Telecom. He was waiting for the bump that usually comes when a founder dies. He was calculating his cut. The organ music swelled, a mournful, heavy sound that vibrated in the floorboards beneath my feet. The priest, Father Thomas, a man who had baptized Elena 30 years ago, stepped up to the altar. He began the homily. It was the standard fare, generic platitudes about a life well lived, about returning to dust, about the great reward beyond. He didn't know the truth. He didn't know he was presiding over an empty box and a crime scene. I sat back in the darkness, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. I wasn't dead. I wasn't even sick anymore. The antidote Dr. Aris had given me had flushed the digitalis from my system. My mind was clear. My hands were steady. I felt a cold, predatory calm settling over me. I was the spider, and they had just walked into the center of the web. The homily ended. Father Thomas gestured to the front row. Elena stood up. She walked to the pulpit with a slow, measured gait. She gripped the sides of the podium, looking out at the crowd of 500 people. She took a deep, shuddering breath. It was masterful. If I didn't know she was a murderer, I would have believed her grief. "My father," she began, her voice trembling just enough to sound fragile. But to me, a ripple of sympathetic murmurs went through the crowd. Someone blew their nose loudly. "He was a man of strength," she continued, looking up toward the stained glass windows, avoiding the casket. "Of integrity. He built an empire on connection, on bringing people together. But in his final days, the world got very small." I gripped the tablet, my knuckles turned white. The audacity was breathtaking. "I held his hand," she said, a tear finally managing to escape and track down her cheek. "I sat by his side as the light faded. It broke my heart to watch him go, to see such a powerful force quieted by time. But I take comfort knowing he is at peace. He told me with his last breath that he loved us. He told me he wanted me to carry on his legacy."
The lie hung in the air, thick and poisonous. It suffocated me. She hadn't held my hand. She had watched a stopwatch. She hadn't heard a final blessing. She had heard me gasping for air as my heart stuttered and failed. Marcus nodded from the front row, wiping a non-existent tear from his cheek. They were winning. They were selling the narrative. In an hour, they would be at the reception, drinking my wine and accepting condolences. By Monday, they would own my life. I looked at the tablet. My thumb hovered over the icon on the screen. "It is time," I whispered to the darkness. I pressed the button. Scree! A sharp, high-pitched static hiss cut through the silence of the cathedral. It didn't come from the church PA system. It came from the center of the aisle. It came from the box. The sound was jarring, violent. It echoed off the stone walls. The crowd froze. Elena stopped mid-sentence, her mouth hanging open.
She looked around, confused. "Is that—" Someone in the third row whispered loudly. The static cut out. Silence returned, heavy and tense. Then, my voice boomed. It wasn't a live feed yet. It was a recording I had made the night before in the back room of the funeral home. I had equalized the audio, added a slight reverb to make it sound hollow, resonant, as if it were coming from deep underground. The single word hit the room like a physical blow. It was loud, authoritative, and unmistakable. Elena stumbled back from the pulpit as if she had been slapped. She grabbed the microphone stand for support. The crowd gasped. Heads snapped toward the mahogany casket. "You didn't hold my hand, Elena," my voice continued, rolling out of the coffin with terrifying clarity. "You held a stopwatch." Panic erupted. It started as a low rumble and exploded into chaos. People stood up. A woman in the back screamed. Marcus shot out of his seat, rushing toward the coffin, his face pale with terror. "Marcus," he yelled, waving his arms at the sound engineer in the back of the church. "Cut the audio. Someone hacked the system." But the engineer wasn't doing anything. His hands were in the air. The sound wasn't coming from his speakers. The audio shifted. The reverb disappeared. The quality changed. It became grainy, intimate. It was the recording I had captured on the hidden microphone in the kitchen. Elena's voice filled the church. It was unmistakable. It was cold, clinical, and cruel. "The digitalis. It mimics natural heart failure. Doctor—"
Elena grabbed her hair, pulling at it. "No, stop it!" "Just a few more days, Marcus." The recording continued, relentless. The confession echoed in the holy space, bouncing off the crucifix, settling over the stunned congregation like fallout. The sympathy in the room evaporated instantly, replaced by a cold, hard horror. The business rivals, the fake friends, the press, they all stared at the woman at the pulpit. They weren't looking at a grieving daughter anymore. They were looking at a parricide. "No!" Elena screamed, her voice shrill and hysterical. She pointed a shaking finger at the coffin. "That's fake! Someone made that up!" I tapped the second button on my tablet, the live mic. "It is not fake," I said. My live voice boomed from the casket, mixing with the acoustics of the room. The heavy lid of the coffin did not open. That would have been too theatrical, too cheap. I didn't need to pop out like a jack-in-the-box. I needed to descend like judgment. I signaled the lighting technician, a young man Dr. Aris had bribed generously an hour ago. The spotlight that usually illuminated the crucifix high above the altar snapped off. A second spotlight, mounted in the choir loft, snapped on. It was blindingly bright, a beam of pure white interrogation. It hit the pulpit first, blinding Elena. Then it swung up. It hit the velvet curtain where I stood. I pulled the cord. The heavy fabric swept back. I stood there, 60 feet above them, dressed in a black suit, looking down like a gargoyle on a cathedral ledge. I wasn't frail. I wasn't shaking. I stood tall, gripping a microphone, my face illuminated by the harsh light. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. It was a sound I will never forget. 500 people realizing they were witnessing a resurrection. "I am Arthur Blackwood," I thundered, my voice projecting from the loft and the coffin simultaneously, creating a surround sound effect of pure authority. Elena looked up. She shielded her eyes against the glare. When she saw me, her legs gave out. It wasn't a performance this time. Her eyes rolled back and she collapsed in a heap of black silk and shame at the foot of the pulpit. Marcus froze. He looked at me, then at the coffin, then at the side exit. He made a choice. He bolted. He shoved past a confused elderly woman and sprinted toward the heavy book doors of the east transept. "Stop him," I commanded over the mic. He hit the doors. He pushed the panic bar. The doors flew open.
But he didn't find freedom. He found the flashing blue lights of the city police force. 2 uniformed officers stepped in, blocking his path. Dr. Aris had called them the moment the service started. They had been listening to the audio feed from the van outside. They heard the confession. They heard the motive. Marcus backed away, his hands raised, looking like a trapped rat. "It wasn't me. It was her idea. She made the tea." I turned away from him. I began the descent.
I walked down the spiral staircase from the choir loft. My steps were slow, deliberate. My knees ached, but I didn't care. I felt stronger than I had in 20 years. Every step was a reclaiming of my life. Every step was a brick being put back into the foundation of my dignity. I reached the floor of the nave. The crowd parted for me. They scrambled over pews to get out of my way, their eyes wide with fear and awe. It was like the Red Sea parting from Moses, if Moses had been an angry old man with a vendetta. I walked past the coffin. I rested my hand on the polished wood for a second. It was cold. It was empty. It was a symbol of the death I had cheated. I walked past the stunned priest, who was crossing himself repeatedly, murmuring prayers in Latin. I stopped at the pulpit. Elena was regaining consciousness. She pushed herself up on her elbows. Her hair was messy, her makeup smeared. She looked up at me. She saw her father, alive, standing over her like a titan. "Daddy," she whispered. Her voice was a broken child's. "Don't call me that," I said quietly. My voice wasn't amplified now. It was just for her. She reached out, grabbing the hem of my pant leg. Her grip was desperate. "Daddy, please. It was the money. We were drowning. The loans. They were going to take everything." "You drowned yourselves," I said, looking down at her with a profound, icy detachment. "You had a home. You had an allowance. You had love. But it wasn't enough." I pulled my leg away from her grasp. "I am freezing the assets, Elena," I said. "I am dissolving the trust. I am firing the legal team you hired." The police officers marched up the center aisle. They were respectful, solemn. They hauled Marcus back toward us. They pulled Elena to her feet. She screamed as the handcuffs clicked into place. "You can't do this to your own daughter." "I am protecting myself," I said. I watched them drag her away. She fought, kicking and screaming, her dignity left in a puddle on the church floor.
Marcus was weeping, begging the officers to cut a deal. The flashbulbs of the press went off, a strobe light of judgment capturing their ruin for the morning papers. The cathedral slowly emptied. The guests fled, eager to distance themselves from the scandal, eager to tweet about the miracle and the horror. Finally, silence returned to the space. I stood alone at the altar. I looked at the empty coffin. It sat there, a useless box of expensive wood. I signaled the funeral director, who was standing in the shadows, looking pale and terrified. "Take it away," I said. He stammered. "I have a lot of living left to do," I said, "and I have a lot of charities to rewrite into my will. Burn the box, or sell it." I turned my back on the altar. I walked down the center aisle, my footsteps echoing in the empty church. I walked past the pews where my fake friends had sat. I walked past the place where my daughter had lied to God. The heavy doors at the end of the nave stood open. Beyond them, the world was bright. The rain had stopped. The sun was breaking through the clouds, washing the city in a clean, golden light. I walked out of the church. I stepped into the sunlight. I took a deep breath of fresh air. It tasted sweet. It tasted like bitter almonds were a thing of the past. I was alive. I was alone. And for the first time in 6 months, I was safe.